is Cristiana Lucidi, who gained her bachelor's degree in classics from the Università degli Studi di Macerata before following further studies at master's level in philology, literature, and ancient history at the same university. She is currently a PhD student at the University of Roehampton, where she is working on a project entitled Living and Dying for Athens, Euripides and the Ideal of Beautiful Death in the late 5th century, under the supervision of Dr. Marco Fantuzzi and Dr. Fiona McCarthy. Today she is presenting her paper entitled Polyxena and the Manly Maiden, Sacrifice as Free Will in Euripides' Hecuba. And I just need, I think, to make you co-host.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
We can, yes.
Okay, perfect. So let me just share my screen so that I can show you my presentation. And here we are. Can you see it?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So before we begin, just a short background. So the self-sacrifice of a virgin recurs several times in Euripides' plays, and in each occasion it follows a formula involving, first, an initial crisis that seems insuperable. Second, the demand of a human victim, which has to be a perfect sacrificial victim. The victim must consent, and then the performance of the sacrifice through the so-called sphagé, which is the cutting of the throat. The main rhetorical element is the great desire to die of the victim, who goes against the wishes of philoi, relatives, and friends, either in the name of a strong patriotism or to gain eternal glory. The main feature of Euripides' staging of self-sacrifice is the consent of the victim, which let the sacrificial virgin move from an entirely passive to an active role. Consent becomes a free choice, and a death which should involve the submission of the victim becomes a voluntary self-sacrifice that can be assimilated to the masculine ideal of beautiful death. However, we should not give in to the temptation of thinking that Euripides' stance is a sort of feminism ante litteram. If it is true that in Euripidean tragedy, sacrificial virgins, to quote Nancy Rabinowitz, escape from the feminine silence without the implication of being loose in their morals, for the playwright gives them not only words, but words calculated to win the very glorious reputation usually reserved for heroes, it is nonetheless true that in Athens women were denied access to heroism. Despite female characters seem like agents, they are actually played by men. The self-sacrificing virgins thus only reassert the masculine warrior code, in the name of which they are giving their youth and beauty. The aim of the present paper is to demonstrate that the character of Polyxena in the Hecuba, despite possessing all the features of the perfect sacrificial virgin, nevertheless makes an exception, stepping out of the female world and dangerously threatening the patriarchal establishment of the Argives. Indeed, her attitude is not that of the prudish virgin who gives her life to protect the community of men and reassert their supremacy, like Iphigenia in Iphigenia Taulis. Polyxena is surprisingly bold and fierce, and faces up her sacrificers, her former enemies, like a warrior on the battlefield. However, she does not fight for her life, trying to get the better of her opponent. To her, that is victory, and the glory that comes with it constitutes the right allotment of Time Geras as a tribute to her valor. She is not merely given away to the masculine world, but she appropriates of the manly arete, which should be the prerogative of the male hero. Moreover, the narration of the sacrifice, from her acceptance to her death, ambiguously recalls a warlike setting. Thus, Polyxena dies like a woman, being slaughtered on the sacrificial altar, but faces death like a man, falling under the blows of her enemy with courage and dignity. From the beginning of the play, despite being strongly sexualized, she stands out for her bravery and sense of honor, which bring her closer to a male hero rather than to a sacrificial virgin. This is not only an impression, the appropriation of masculine values and features by Polyxena is continuously remarked throughout the first half of the play, from her acceptance of the death to the account of a slaughter. A look into the text will let us fully understand the complexity of Polyxena's character. So the first text we have, and I decided to put this in my presentation, not to read through this, otherwise my presentation would be way too long. And this scene belongs to the agon between Hecuba and Odysseus, where the latter, Odysseus, used his rhetoric skills to convince Hecuba of the necessity to kill her daughter. And at the end of the agon, Polyxena, having understood Odysseus' tricks, assert what you can read in my slide. So, as we have already seen, in Euripides, the victim's willingness to die is crucial to make the sacrifice effective. At any rate, Polyxena is somehow different from the other sacrificial virgins. Indeed, she's not preferring death over a long and happy life in order to favor the good fate of her family or city and not to be accused of cowardice. She is rather preferring a noble death over over the disgrace of a shameful life, a choice associated in tragedy with aristocratic characters, like, for example, the Sophoclean Ajax. Polyxena, although rhetorically declaring that her death is inevitable but welcome, embraces it without considering any other option. We might assume that perhaps she was already thinking about suicide as the only way to preserve her status and dignity. Sacrifice is to her the perfect occasion to fulfill her will. Polyxena, considering death as a way to avoid her own disaster, is confirmed by the fact that she sees the potential union with a slave as a form of pollution. This is furtherly reinforced by the use of omaton eleutheron, which means free eyes, at line 3 and at line 367, which is not to be considered an inconsistency of Polyxena. It is true that she had already affirmed that she is a slave, which makes her long for death. In any case, I think that this can be regarded as a way to emphasize that she would have never been able to regain her aristocratic status was she given the opportunity to endure life. She therefore considers herself as a slave by name, even if she will never become a slave by fact. The conclusive reflection once again reasserts that death is long preferable to life, since a dishonorable life is a heavy burden. Polyxena prefers a voluntary death over life to fulfill a desire to preserve her aristocratic integrity. To quote Stephen Dates, finding herself deprived of the choice of freedom or death, Polyxena chooses freedom and death. Unable to live a life which she could not accept, Polyxena prefers not to live at all. It is the inner attitude of Polyxena which is crucial in transforming the revolting murder of a slave into a moving spectacle of human strength, dignity, and renunciation. Polyxena, like Achilles, whom she's been sacrificed to, takes on the role of the young male warrior who considers a short but glorious life crowned by beautiful death long preferable to a long, tranquil, and easily forgettable life. However, she does not want to die in the flower of her youth only to become a heroine. She does so mainly to be forever immortalized in a status of nobility and beauty, a status in which her appearance perfectly matches her social rank and her aristocratic disposition, preventing slavery from spoiling her free eyes and the inner pride of her fierce gaze. At any rate, Polyxena chooses that to achieve that individual kleos which belongs to the archaic warrior. She opts for a beautiful death, both aesthetically because she is in the prime of her youth, and ethically because she prefers to put a good and honorable end to her life instead of cowardly clinging to it. So, next slide. Polyxena's attitude immediately raises the admiration of Hecuba and the chorus, which will be mirrored by that of the Argive themselves. According to Talthybius' account of the killing of Polyxena, despite the sacrifice was carried out by Achilles, son of Ptolemus, Polyxena steals the show from the beginning to the end of the sacrificial ritual, reducing her captors to the role of mere executors of a fate which she herself has willingly accepted. Talthybius makes clear that Polyxena is the only woman in the scene, being surrounded by the Argive mob. It is not difficult to imagine the audience repugnance at seeing a virgin among a crowd, which is emphasized by the insistence on the participation of the Ochlos to the sacrifice. This is perhaps a hint to the frequent gang rape of war captive, functional to introduce the strong sexual connotation of the scene. Talthybius, saying that Neoptolemus himself took her by hand and accompanied her on the top of a mound, brings a double meaning along with it. First, Neoptolemus taking Polyxena's hand and bringing her to the altar is another reference to the ritual of marriage. This can be also a hint to the love story between Achilles and Polyxena, which Euripides' audience was with all probability familiar with. This romantic association of Polyxena to Achilles contributes to the sexualization of her sacrifice. Polyxena, like a bride, is transferred from the feminine to the masculine world. Despite she says she would give herself to Hades, Polyxena's marriage to death is literally a marriage to Achilles' ghost, since she is meant to join him in death. In any case, while other plays emphasize what the Virgin loses with her death, in the Hecuba, the emphasis is on the bad fate that Polyxena is avoiding. Marriage and a long life are exactly what she's glad to deny herself, because the prospect of becoming a slave makes life not worth living anymore. Polyxena will never be forced to marry a slave, nor will she become the concubine of a Greek leader, not Ptolemus included. Her death will seal her union with Achilles as that of a free woman to a free man. In any case, Polyxena never refers to Achilles and contributes to interpret their sacrifice as a decision of her own. She somehow manages to replace the honors due to Achilles with those the Achaeans will give her and appropriates of their ideals, becoming a heroic figure on par with Achilles. Second, the act of placing the victim in position recalls the ritual animal sacrifice, which usually occur before a battle, theme that is this further supported by the fact that Polyxena is compared to a heifer. However, both these references denote Polyxena's sacrifice as a perverted rite. First, Neoptolemus playing the role of the groom might be, to a certain extent, part of an ironic procedure, since it is evident that the girl is being killed as an offer to his father, Achilles. Second, Polyxena's sacrifice, besides being human rather than animal, is performed not before battle, but at the conclusion of the war, not to guarantee success on the battlefield, but to definitely leave it. As soon as she realizes that Neoptolemus wants the soldier to seize her and drag her to the sacrificial mound, Polyxena forbids the Argive to touch her and affirms that she will spontaneously and bravely offer her neck to her sacrificer, as we can see in her reported speech by Talthybius. This is the textual proof that she manages to become the only protagonist of her sacrifice. To quote Nancy Rabinovitz once again, Polyxena tries to avoid her status in the circulation of male honor and male meaning and to assert herself as a subject. She resists construction as a victim. The assumption of her full length is the of her full hate is the corollary of her acceptance of death. She would rather be a corpse than a slave. This might prove that Polyxena fully embraces Achilles' kind of heroism. She does not give herself to the sacrifices in order to save her community, but rather to gain personal glory and preserve her social status. In so doing, she saves her own honor and freedom without caring for the other Trojan women who are sentenced to slavery by the oncoming of the Greek army. What is more, when the soldiers let her go, she tears her robe, exposing her upper body, then boldly asks Neoptolemus to choose whether to strike her breasts or cut her throat. According to Skodel, by exposing her breasts, Polyxena reestablishes herself as a desirable and valuable item of display. Moreover, she insists on controlling the exposure of her own body, so that the exhibitionistic gesture serves at the same time to affirm her freedom. Although the scene can be compared to certain artistic representation of women with their breasts exposed in a posture typical of victim of sexual assault, I think her gesture rather indicates that she is consciously provoking Neoptolemus and with him the Argive mob, flouting the affront to her dignity that the Argives might have made, and that she prevented, thanks to the untouchability of the sacrificial victim. The act of uncovering the breast also recalled the scene of Helen burying her breast in supplication when Menelaus attacked her with his sword. Polyxena is in sharp contrast with Helen, since she is bravely and shamelessly offering her breast to Neoptolemus in order to be killed, not cowardly begging him for mercy. While Helen used her feminine beauty as a defensive weapon, or better, as a substitute for flight, Polyxena uses her beauty aggressively, like the soldier who runs fearlessly towards the enemy. Thus, the two women seem to be the feminine counterpart of the Tirteas Aneragatos and the Tirtean Thresas. It is unlikely that the girl was actually triggering the Argives to the point that they would have lost control. In any case, it is possible that the audience linked the scene to that of Ajax tearing away Cassandra from the altar and the statue of Athena and raping her in the sanctuary. Euripides' use of gory and quasi-pornographic details can thus be functional to indicate the perversion of the sacrificial ritual. What is more, being struck in the breast would definitely assimilate Polyxena's death to death of a warrior, and further distort the ritual, depriving it from the vital element of the throat cutting, which makes the culmination of the sacrifice analogous to that of the marriage, that is, the defloration of the virgin. In any case, the choice is up to Neoptolemus, who, deciding to cut her neck instead of her breast, brings back the sacrificial atmosphere and setting, as well as the femininity of the victim, which up to that point was only physical and not behavioral. Nevertheless, the emphasis on bloodshed recalls that on the act of killing and the blood that spurts out from under the blade, typical of war scenes. Once again, in Euripides, a war setting interferes with the sacrificial setting. And here, does so in the most unexpected way, since Polyxena is not killed to promote a military expedition or guarantee a victory in battle, but when the war has already come to an end. Euripides seemed therefore to be playing with gender and sexuality to both arouse the interest of the audience and underline the inherent inconsistency and perversion of the sacrifice. In any case, we should bear in mind that in the Iliad, both face-to-face combat and the slaughter of a hero on the battlefield are highly eroticized. And then we can go to the next slide. At 13, in book 13, line 291 and 17, 228, the term oaristus, which commonly indicates sexual intercourse, is used to describe a direct affront between two warriors. In book 5, line 143 and 15, line 510, the verb magnumi, which indicates a sexual union, is used also in a military context. Then, let us go to the following slide. In book 22, line 373, 374, Hector's dead body is said to be malakoteros, adjective eminently feminine. I think this allows us to think that the sexualization of the sacrificial virgin is functional not only to assimilate the sacrifice to the nuptial rite, but also to make it fit the warlike context in which it is performed. This is even more evident in the case of Polyxena, who is closer to an epic hero rather than to a failed bride. Through Talthybius' words, then, Polyxena becomes a spectacle for the audience. She wants to make herself desirable. She is an oxymoric active object of the male race, oxymoron remarked by the contrast between Polyxena pathetically stage managing her sacrifice and the ataraxic beauty conveyed by the image of the statue Talthybius uses to describe her naked body. In particular, the use of the superlative callista is remarkable, since in the tragedy there are very few occurrences where a woman's body is described in such terms. I partially agree with Michelini when she claims that Polyxena, unlike Helen, uses her nudity not to beg for her life to be spared, but to win honor and respect from the Greeks. What she defines an evident contradiction between the refusal to be touched and her provocative preparation for the sacrifice is actually a well-constructed ironic device. It is the victim herself who unexpectedly perverts the sacrificial ritual, who threatens to contaminate her own purity. Polyxena is well aware that, despite being a war captive, she cannot be touched by the men surrounding her, otherwise she will not make a perfect sacrificial victim anymore. She's not a victim of patriarchy. On the contrary, she highlights all the limits and weaknesses of that eminently masculine society. Going back to the image of the statue, this conveys not only the idea of Polyxena's stunning beauty and appeal, but also that of Polyxena's untouchability sanctioned by the status of sacrificial victim, which delivers her to the realm of the sacred. In any case, since the actor was male, the heterosexual erotic that I referred to could exist only in the imagination. The homoerotic potential of the scene remains hidden under a robe, but perhaps it is significant that this fetishistic desire for Polyxena is aroused only when she seems to act like a male hero. This interpretation is partly supported by the act of Polyxena covering her genitals before dying, which can compare to Tyrtaeus fragment 10 West, line exactly. And here we are, line 21-27. Here, Tyrtaeus is clearly alluding to Iliad 20-22, line 75, adapting the line to a different context. In the Iliad, in fact, Priam is picturing in his mind the ominous scene of him, an old man, having his genitals torn apart by his own dogs, while Tyrtaeus depicts a word of receiving the worst possible wound on the battlefield. Then, the words of Thalmois and Eden, along with Iskra and Nemeseton, show that in the ancient Greek culture, the physicality which can be perceived with the eyes and the moral implication are interconnected and inseparable. Therefore, Polyxena's last moment further reduces the difference between sexes, which is not only natural, but also a social and cultural construct. This is confirmed by Phylosebalon at line 574, which, according to the Scholion, means that the Greeks were bringing gift to Polyxena's dead body as if she had won a victory in the games. And this term can be found also in Pindar and Bacchylides when referring to the victory of an athlete. So Polyxena's sexually promiscuous body, in fact, is a spectacle for the eye. It remains on stage for a long time after her death and literally becomes an obsession of the play, a sexual innuendo used an expedient for winning a little more audience a little more audience attention. This contributes to the tragic irony which permeates the relationship between sexes in Hecuba and prolongs the prudent aspects of the play, which are further confirmed by Hecuba's concern about her daughter's body. Hecuba's worry about the destiny of her daughter's body is not only that of a mother who would not stand an outrage against her daughter, but also the expression of an epic concern, the same which in the Iliad made her husband Priam ask Achilles to give him back the body of Hector. Indeed, in the side-centered epic word, the greatest enemy of the beautiful death, the main obstacle that can prevent a warrior from becoming a class, which means immortal after death, is the treatment reserved to his body. Such a concern for the appearance of the cadaver is underlined by funerary rites. As described in both the Iliad and the Odyssey, the body is washed with warm water, oiled to make the skin shiny, perfumed and exposed on a bed, an actual spectacle to be seen and admired. A beautiful death, in fact, can be fully achieved only if the body of the young dead preserves its beauty, that is, remains untouched, does not suffer the outrage of the enemy. In this way, Hecuba's words are yet another element which brings the character of Polyxena furtherly closer to an epic warrior, distorting her role as a sacrificial virgin and blurring even more the distinction between sexes. However, the appropriation of masculine features does not end with Polyxena. Indeed, it goes on in the second part of the play and finds its climax in Hecuba's bloody revenge, which makes the play a sort of recomposition, beginning and ending with violence and bloodshed. In this scene, like Agave in Bacche, Medea in the homonymous play, and Clytemnestra in Aeschylus' Agamemnon, Hecuba appropriates of a homicidal violence which is typically masculine and recalls that of Heracles in the homonymous play, definitely perverting gender roles and rules. Despite such a revenge is performed in a typically feminine manner, that is by deceit, Hecuba appears like the leader of an army. She literally marshals a small army of Trojan women into her tent and successfully ambushes Polymestor, killing his sons and blinding him. While Agave killed her son by mistake in the grip of a Bacchic fancy, Hecuba, similarly to Medea and Clytemnestra, arranges her revenge with a cold mind, the same which allowed her daughter to embrace her beautiful death. And this leads us to the conclusion, which are that the Hecuba shows from the beginning to the end a perversion of gender roles. Women, and moreover barbarian women, act like men, threatening and almost managing to subvert the patriarchal system. Polyxena dangerously moves from the realm of the feminine to that of the masculine, appropriating of the heroic code and system of values. Her attitude at the end of the tragedy is mirrored by that of her mother Hecuba, whose revenge against Polymestor is performed with a homicidal violence which is typically masculine. At any rate, that's exactly it is exactly their ethnicity which allows them to perform the perversion of gender roles, heroic values, and the sacrificial ritual without seeming scandalous in the eye of the Athenian audience. Thank you so much, and this was the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Christina, for that.